Hey, this is Seth Parnell, the minister of the Portia Church of Christ, and this is episode 183 of the Midweek Bible Study. Hope that you are doing well. Hope everything's going your way. We appreciate you being here tonight and to study with us as we are going to take a look at a pretty interesting character that we don't know a whole lot about in Judges chapter 3. But hopefully you've had a good day and maybe enjoyed some of it. It was kind of a little bit chilly, I know, in the morning, but not bad. Not bad for a day, for one of the first few days in spring. And so, as we know, we're no longer in winter, we're in spring now. And so, hopefully, you'll be enjoying that. Apologize for being late, about 30 minutes late. I had some technical difficulties that were of my own making. I had my mic wasn't working, and so I reached over there to try to adjust it, and I accidentally hit the power button on my computer, and that shut my computer down, so I had to restart it and then get everything set again, and it was a mess. But we got it all set back up, and we're ready to go. You hear tonight. We're just a little bit late, but the good thing is the man that we're studying about tonight, Othniel, there's not that much that we know about him, so it'll probably be a short lesson anyway. But apologize for getting started here late tonight. But as we always do, we want to give you an invitation. If you're someone who is in the Portia area, then come by and see us sometime. We are located at 307 South Jackson Street in Portia, Arkansas. Right now we are meeting at 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock on Sunday night, and 6 o'clock on Wednesday night. And so we're going through the book of 1 Corinthians on Sunday morning. We're going through the book of Acts on Wednesday night. And so hopefully you can join us one of those times. We'd love to see you. We'd love to talk with you, to worship with you, and to have that fellowship. And so if you're in the area, please feel free to come by and see us. Also, we want to know if you have any suggestions, if you have any input about what you would like to see future episodes on, then feel free to send those my way as well. Love to hear what you have to say. Love to know what you're thinking about, and so that we can maybe do some episodes that would meet that. But I know that you have that opportunity as well. We want to welcome some people in here tonight. We got Jackie Henry. Hope that you are doing good. Always appreciate you being here with us. We got Donna is here. Hope that you are doing well and that you've had a good day. And we've also got the Malins as well. I hope you guys are doing well back there in Portia. You my old neighbors. It's good to have you guys here tonight. We're going to be in Judges chapter 3. Judges chapter 3. We're going to start in verse 7. And as I plan, we're going to go through all the judges here in the book of Judges, and at least that's my plan for right now. We're going to take a look at all of them. There's a few judges that we'll probably group together because there's only like one verse or one sentence about them, but usually when you study a character, sometimes you can get more out of it than if you just glance over it. And so we might group some together, but I plan to take a look at most of the judges that we find here in this pretty fascinating book that tells a unique story about a very wild time in the history of Israel. We have a lot of Israel's history from the time in which they were with Abraham, when Abraham was the father of this nation. He was the leader, the patriarch of that group. Him and his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob, and then Joseph, and the rest of the 12 tribes who came from them. And they had good times and they had bad times. They had times when they were in oppression. Times when they were, being subjected to oppression by Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. There are times when other nations oppressed them. There are times when they had, great, prosperity. When they, were able to walk across that Red Sea and be able to have the waters collapse on the Egyptians following them. That was a great moment of victory for them. You can go fast forward to a time in which they go out and they are praising God, and they are having a great victory against the city of Jericho. That is a great moment of victory for them as well. But they also had times that they didn't do so great. And we know the rebellion of Korah. We know that they had times which they worshiped the golden calf in which they created, a time in which they did not believe the spies and kind of became fearful of going into the land of Canaan. They had a lot of moments they weren't proud of as well. And that's typical of a life of a group of people. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have good things and bad things. You're going to have things that you are proud of and things that you are not proud of. And Israel very much hit both ends of that spectrum. But as I said, the era of the judges is very interesting because it's far more decentralized than any other point in their history. I mean, usually you have the family system, which was the patriarchs with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or you had kings later on. You're with Solomon and David and Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and Hezekiah, Josiah. All those kings who provided that leadership, who provided that that guidance in those moments of trial. But during the time of the judges, it's much more decentralized. It's a much more chaotic era in history, in which, if you look at the end of this book, one of the last things that's said about this time is that every man did what was right in his own eyes. Everyone did what they thought was right from their own perspective, which in the end was not a good way to go. And Israel continually went after things that were against God. As we see here in verse 7 of Judges chapter 3, it kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen with all these judges going into this book. In verse 7 it says, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherah." And so we have this scene set, and as I said, this is going to be the scene that will be set for most all the judges that we read about. The people of Israel, they were doing well, but then they fell off. They started chasing other things. It says that they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God, and they served the Baals and the Asherah. And those two things usually go hand in hand. A lot of times sometimes people wonder why we talk about some of the same things, so much. Why we talk about, the crucifixion of Jesus, and why we talk about, we remember him in the Lord's Supper. We talk about things such as love, and talk about, the responsibility of a Christian, the leadership of a Christian, how you become a Christian. We talk about similar things, quite a bit, and that's usually not, by accident, because many times we don't need to find out something, brand new. We just need to be reminded of what God has told us, to do. Because if we forget, should we forget any of those things, should we forget who Jesus is, what Jesus has done for us, how a Christian should behave in this world, how a Christian should come to know God, how a person should come to know God. If we forget those things, what's going to happen? Well, as it says here in Judges, chapter 3 and verse 7, it says they forgot the Lord their God, and what did they do? They served the Baals and the Asherah. If we forget those things about God, those things we need to be reminded of, constantly, then that usually directly leads us to serving, something else. And in our day and age, we're not going to chase after, a false, a statue or an idol or something like that. But we're still going to chase after something other than God. And it's going to lead us into things that are against what God would have us to do. And typically, when it comes to idolatry, in the Old Testament and in the New Testament as well, it wasn't necessarily the idols themselves that I think people chased after. It wasn't necessarily the idea of worshiping a statue or worshiping this structure that attracted so many people. It was the celebrated behavior that came along with it. The immorality, the revelry that went along, with it. That's what I think attracted, a lot of people in that sense. And they were able to do that. A lot of, pagan worship, a lot of service in that regards had a lot to do with immorality and with, those other kind of, kind of party, characteristics, as you might say. And so that's usually what attracted, so many people. What Israel, they did was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God, and that led them to serving these false things. And so we see this timeline already developing here in verse 7, to where it says, as I said, they forgot the Lord their God, and they served the Baals and the Asheroth. And then what happened to that in verse 8? Well, how did God respond to that? Well, it says, therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served Cushan Rishathaim 8 years. And you might know a better way to pronounce that name, but I don't. And so I'm just going to roll with that and call that good. But it says that this made the anger of the Lord, burn up. It caused it to kindle, the anger of the Lord against Israel. And because of that, he removed his protection from them, something that Moses very plainly told them. And if you look at Deuteronomy, if you look at some of the last things that Moses would tell Israel, he was very upfront. He was very straightforward about this. He says, if you serve God, he's going to protect you. He's going to hold on to you. But if you forsake him and you chase after these other things, don't expect, God to be there for you when you throw him off at every turn. And so their ancestors heard this, but they had forgotten, what those words meant. And so the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. He sold them into the hand of this king of Mesopotamia, and they served him 8 years. 8 years, this took place. And so this wasn't just a night. This wasn't just, a small period of time, but for 8 years this went on. They were oppressed by this king. And the big long name of this king here of Mesopotamia actually means Cushan of double wickedness. And some people think that this was a kind of an inclusion by the writer, or this was something that was a title of this king, kind of like you think of, Ivan the Terrible, in the, as far as a kind of a title that is associated with a person, or Alexander the Great. We don't usually call him Alexander, we call him Alexander the Great. And so this may have been, his name may have been Cushan, and then that Rishathaim meant, kind of, it was more of a title instead of his actual name. But that's just kind of a side note for that. But because the anger of the Lord, was kindled against them, they sold them into the hand of this king, and they served him 8 years. And so you have, Israel marching out triumphantly from Egypt. They go through the Red Sea. They go through the wilderness, and they defeat, Jericho. And you think that they were free, from oppression, but you don't have to go very far. And down here into, verse in Judges chapter 3, we find them being oppressed again for 8 years. And so as we keep up with this timeline, they forgot the Lord their God, and that led them to serving these false gods, and that caused the anger of the Lord, to be burned up and to be kindled against them, and that caused them to sell them into the hand of this king, and they were oppressed. And so the wickedness of these people, their idolatry ended up being something that was against their best interest, even from a outside, point of view. They chased after these gods, and that caused them, maybe temporary pleasure, but in the end, it put them into oppression, and it put them into a situation where they were not their own master, but they had to serve, somebody else. And that happens with a lot of times when we deal with sin, when we deal with some of those more addictive behaviors, some of those more things that kind of grab us in habitually and kind of keep us, coming back. It gives us maybe temporary, pleasure. It maybe gives us a temporary satisfaction, but in the end, where does it lead us to? It continues to lead us, down until we find ourselves in a state of oppression, and we wonder, how did I get here, or how did I get in this, situation? Because the gradual road, to that is always leading away, from God. We know that If we serve God, that doesn't mean that God is going to, bless us and with, a abundance of earthly blessings. We'll be, healthy and rich and everything of that. We know that that's not the case. But a road that leads away from God is usually one that leads downhill, for us, and puts us eventually in a place of oppression. And we don't want to be there. We don't want to we don't want anybody really to experience something like that. But serving God usually makes us into the best possible person that we can be. When we embrace things such as love and such as kindness, gentleness, peacefulness, self-control, gentleness. If we're a group of people that embraces those types of things, that makes us into, one of the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And the opposite, if we're someone who embraces, the opposite of that, that a lot of times that's not a person you want to trust. It's not a person you want to be around all too much. And so we need to be aware of that, as we make the decisions in our life. But it's good to have Ted Knight here with us. I hope that you are doing well. And I hear that I believe, if I'm correct, you are preaching a gospel meeting in Nettleton. You're coming up soon. And so be sure to put that on your calendars and check that out if you can, because he's definitely a fantastic preacher. So you won't want to miss that. But it's good to have you here tonight. But we got in verse 7, and then down to verse 8, and then down to verse 9. And so they find themselves in this place of oppression. And in verse 9, eventually, this leads to the people crying out to the Lord. And the Lord raises up a deliverer for the people of Israel who saved them. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And so eventually, people realize that there is one who can bring them out of this state. There is one who can rescue them from these hardship, from these hard times, and they cry out to the Lord. They may have cried out to Baal before, they may have cried out to Asheroth before, but apparently they did not listen. They did not hear, because they cannot. And so eventually they cry out to God. And we do that sometimes ourselves too. A lot of times we try to fix things. We try to go through different solutions before we go to God, before we kind of cry out to God in this sense. We may try to fix things ourselves before we take it to Him. But eventually they cried out to God. God hears them. He heard them, and He raised up a deliverer, this man Othniel, who was the son of Kenaz, who was basically the nephew of Caleb. And we know a lot about Caleb. He was featured pretty heavily in the Exodus story, and when the 10 spies were going out, and him and Joshua were some of the 2 faithful spies. And so he was a pretty good leader. He was a great leader for Israel as well. And Othniel would take after him in a big way. He was somebody who was very courageous. He was somebody who was very strong, and somebody who was very dedicated as well. If you look back to, I believe it's back in Joshua, I believe, and I wrote it down, but when I had to restart my computer, I lost it. But there was a scene in which Caleb finds the stronghold, this city that is just entrenched, and he makes this announcement. He says, "I will give you my daughter in marriage to anybody who can assault and take you that city." And eventually Othniel was the one who stood up, and he attacked that city, and he ended up being able to marry Caleb's daughter. And so he was somebody who was very very in his leadership and in what he did. Someone who was very strong. And that was a big part of what Joshua did, and the message that he brought forth. And so we can see this passed down to Othniel as well. But he was somebody who was very strong in that sense, and he wanted to he did a lot for Israel before this, and now he's being raised up as a deliverer for the people of Israel. And so in verse 10, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel, and he went out to war. And the Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, the king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed over him." And so it says that he raised him up, but the key element here, when it says that he raised him up, was it says that the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave this king into his hand. This mighty king who had oppressed them for 8 years, when the Spirit of the Lord is upon Othniel, he's able to overcome him. He's able to conquer him. It's said many times in the Bible, we can do all things. God, through the power of God, we can do a lot of things in this life. We can get through a lot of hardship. We can conquer a lot of battles through the power of God. And God used Othniel. Othniel was the tool that God used in order to deliver Israel from this oppression. And this mighty man, this strong and courageous man, was somebody who had prepared himself to be used by God in this case, to be served, to serve God with what he was able to do. And that's also a good example for us as well, to try to make ourselves into the kind of person that God can use, that God can use in a big way for his service. And we know that you don't have to be someone that is a preacher or someone who can move a mountain in order to serve God in a big way. Those little things, there's a number of things. If you think about it, if you take a look at your own life and what you can do well, what you have the ability to do, there is so many things you could do for the glory of God. But if we grow ourselves, if we cultivate our skills and our talents and our abilities to where God can use us and God can use those talents for his work, that's a great thing to do. That's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And so that we can be a people that doesn't just serve God at church or serve God with our words, but we can serve him with our actions, with our skills, with our abilities, with the things that we are good at or enjoy doing. We can do them to the glory of God. And so it's good to be specific. It's good to plan on what kind of servant do I want to be for God, and how do I get there? Once you think about that, how do I get there? Othniel was very strong. He was very powerful. He was very courageous, and God used that for his purpose here. How is God going to use you in your life? How is God going to use you in order to glorify his kingdom? It's a good thing to think about, and when we examine our own life. But he says he went out to war. The Lord gave him, this king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and he prevailed over him. And so this first time of oppression that Israel's had for a long time is able to be overcome, by a man whom the Spirit of the Lord rested upon. And this man, who is named Othniel. And so in the end, we get down here to verse 11, where it says, "So the land had rested 40 years. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died." And so because of what Othniel was able to do, because of his victory, because of his courage, because of his ability to be able to be used by God, what was the result of that? What was the consequence? That the land had rest for 40 years, and he judged Israel during that time. And we know, if you've read through the book of Judges, you know that period of peace doesn't last, because Israel's going to kind of fall back into what they've always done. But for 40 years, the land had rest. That's almost especially in that day and time in which life expectancy maybe wasn't as long as it is today. That's a good part of a generation that grew up in peace and grew up in a land of rest, and that's a good thing to think about. And so, if we're somebody who fights that battle. For somebody who is used, by God in a big way, like Othniel was, what is the promise that God has given us? What is that end result of the life of a faithful Christian? He says that we will be given rest, as well. We will be given rest. We will be given, that chance to be, with God, in heaven. But that won't be for 40 days. It won't be for 40 years. But that will be for an eternity. We have rest to look forward to from all the stress and all the rigors and all the hardship and all the tragedy of this life. We can have rest from that. If we're someone who's willing to step up and be that faithful Christian in this life. And in a world that tries to throw, everything, about Christianity to the side and mock it or throw it away as something that is useless, hold on to it. Hold on to it strong, because in the end, we will have rest if we are found to be faithful. And so, Othniel is an interesting character to take a look at. And as we see, the state of Israel was not good, and Othniel is not. We don't know all that much about him, but what we do know is that he was strong. He was courageous. He took after the instruction of his, of his former and of his, ancestors and of his, the people who came before him. If you read throughout the book of Joshua, many times, Joshua says, "Be strong and courageous." And it appears Othniel took that to heart. He was a good listener, and he lived that out in his life as well. But he was somebody who did this, and because the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, he was able to have victory and eventually have rest in this battle that he went forth. And we also saw that there was a timeline, to this, and how they forgot the Lord their God, and that caused them to embrace, idols, idolatry, and immorality, and that caused the anger of the Lord to rise up, and that caused them to be sold into a land of oppression. And eventually, the grace of God, the love of God, caused them to raise up a deliverer, and they were able to be free, from that. And a lot of times, it's easy to criticize Israel for doing this, but take a look at our world today and ask, do we, especially as a group of people, do we embrace, sin, or do we embrace, God more in our world today? And sadly, it's hard to make the case. If you take a look at our world as a whole, or our nation as a whole, sometimes it's hard to make the case that we embrace, God, more. But Israel they're human. They're mankind. And man, some things change over the years and some things don't. And the fact that, mankind has had this problem with spirituality, this problem with, trusting God and following after him, has been here since Adam and Eve. And it will be here probably till the time that this earth is over. But if we can follow the example of Othniel in this case, I think that we will do well, as a Christian. I hope this is done well for you, and hope that you were blessed, to be here, with us tonight. We so appreciate you stopping by and being with us. We'll be back here next week at 7 o'clock for another episode of the midweek Bible study. And so, hope you can join us then. Hope you can come be with us. We always love to see you, whether you're a good supporter of us, when you're here every week, as I know a lot of you are, and so appreciate you. Or if you're someone who is new, we always love to see you and love to have you here in our study with us. And as we know, always have a good group of people here. And we have Donna says, great lesson. Appreciate you being here. And we got Farrell. He's here with us. He says his son-in-law has been doing some live streams with Barry Odell on Thursdays. It should be illegal to take a day you already use. Hey, that sounds like a fantastic a study as well. I always love you, Barry. Always love Zach. They are two great people. And so, what is the name of that? Is that just with the Mammoth Spring Church of Christ, or is there a name for their live stream? Because you need to check that out. If you like your online Bible study, online conversations, like this, you definitely check Barry Odell. He's a great He's a great great preacher. He knows how to do it, and Zach's really good as well. And so definitely check them out if you get the chance. Farrell, do you know do they stream like on Thursday nights, or do you know their schedule, or when usually when they go live? The Barry and Zach show. But you can probably find their schedule on there. But like I said, be sure to go check them out, because if you look for them, then there's a lot of good things you can find. A lot of good online resources of very very godly people that you can check out. And again, I apologize tonight for the technical difficulties that we had tonight. We got started really late because of those, but we managed. I think we had a good study here tonight. But I appreciate everyone, and be sure to try to support those who put out the gospel and have those good conversations, because I think that's a lot of what we need here in this world. As there's a lot of things to talk about. A lot of things to be to have conversations about. But I think you can never go wrong with a study of the Word of God. But hope that you do well, and hope you have a wonderful week, and hope you glorify God in everything that you do. Catch you next time.